Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we're releasing a bonus episode. This is content that is taken from an interview that I did in September of 2022, and that episode was called Mindset and Performance with Formula One commentator Tom Gaymor. And that was episode 341 of Boundless Body Radio. I am just re-releasing this today because we're back to racing in Formula One. If you know anything about me, you know that I've gotten hugely into Formula One in the last few years. It all started when Netflix started releasing their amazing sports documentary called Drive to Survive. I had zero interest in motorsport for most of my life, and this thing kept popping up in my recommended shows on Netflix. I finally, several years ago, just decided, okay, let me just give this 15 minutes, check this out. I probably won't be into this at all. Within like 3 minutes, my jaw was on the ground. I binged all the episodes of that season and watched all of the subsequent seasons since. And after watching Drive to Survive and getting to know the personalities and the drama behind the sport, I've actually gotten into the sport itself, which kicks on today in Bahrain. So excited for this season. So I'm just re-releasing this again. It's an interesting conversation. Tom is a wonderful commentator. He's commentated for Formula One in the past. He mostly focuses on other forms of motorsport currently and other sports. But I thought this was a really interesting discussion about the sport itself, what it is needed to be a driver, the equipment they use, all that stuff. So I hope you enjoy this one. Again, you can go back and check out the full episode on episode 341. This is just the highlights about Formula One. And I hope you enjoy this bonus episode. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. Tom Gaymor is a sports journalist and commentator, specializing in motorsports. Currently, Tom is working in Formula One, leading the commentary for F1 TV, and is also leading Sky Sports IndyCar coverage, including anchoring the studio for the world-famous Indy 500. Starting out as a racing driver, Tom soon swapped the steering wheel for a microphone after injury. Although Tom is best known as a motorsport broadcaster, Tom has also broadcast at the last two Olympic Games and from Premiership Rugby. Tom has a vast motorsport knowledge, having been involved in the sport for almost 30 years. He also works on a variety of other events for Discovery Eurosport, including the Le Mans 24-Hour and the World Endurance Championship, among others. In July 2011, Tom formed the Tom Gaymor Consultancy Ltd, or TGC, to bring all of his consultancy projects under one roof and to further create a professional platform from which to operate. TGC specializes in talent development, driver coaching, performance management, and mentoring. Tom Gaymor, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you to Balanced Body Radio.
Thank you for having me. You should work in marketing and PR, and I'll definitely hire you because you do a wonderful job.
The introduction's the best part. Yeah, it's the best part. We always offer our guests, if any time in this conversation you're feeling a little down and you want me to read it again, we can do that. Totally fine.
Yeah, that sounds very impressive.
Oh, man, you are the voice in my head every time I'm at a stoplight. I've got a stick shift car, which nobody has around here, and I'm watching the stoplight, and as soon as that light turns green, it is your voice that says, lights out, and away we go.
Yeah, no, that's a wonderful feeling. And when you're in the car or in the commentary booth, it's still the same. And that's what's been a wonderful transition for me, certainly. Having had the sort of adrenaline and that hook when you're in the car, live TV, although I'm not driving anymore, live TV still delivers that. And for me, there's nothing better than that 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, we're live. And the organized chaos that then plays out, and then being able to sort of share in the fun as the cars go green and head down to turn one. You never know what you're going to expect. And that's the wonderful thing for TV. So, I'm really lucky having swapped the steering wheel for the microphone, as you say, to still have that sort of kick, because as I get a bit older, I certainly do realize that whatever it is I do, it needs to be sort of practical, kinesthetic, definitely, with that hint of adrenaline.
Oh, it's amazing. Well, you do such an amazing job, and I want to talk about kind of what you do. And we're also going to get into your personal story, which I think is fabulous. But I was hoping we could start by talking about the sport itself. And I would just say, like, for the listener, you might not be interested in Formula One, and I can certainly relate, because I was alongside, most listeners who might not be familiar with this. And there was a podcast that was done on one of my very favorite podcasts, Peter Attia, the Drive podcast, where he hosted Luke Bennett, who's one of the doctors at HINSA, which you introduced me to actually. And learning about the physical and mental and emotional demands on the drivers was so gripping. And I'm also just curious too, what has it been like for you to be in the sport for so long and to now get this like crazy influx of people like me who were not familiar with this sport at all, started watching this crazy series on Netflix, Drive to Survive, were absolutely fascinated, and now are like watching every race and every practice session, every qualifying. Like, what has that been like?
I think for me, it's brought a wonderful diversity to the fan base of the sport. I mean, we aim to be as collective and as inclusive as possible, but motorsport is not the most accessible sport, and that's whether or not you participate in it and or whether or not you want to go and watch it. We all grow up around more mainstream sports. So in this country, you've got your football, your rugby, and your cricket, and I'm sure in the States, wherever you are, it'll be your football, your baseball, your soccer, your basketball, and they're a bit more accessible. That's what you play at school. That's what you play out of school. That's what you might play with your friends. And motorsport is off on a tangent. If you don't have a family member, a loved one, or a direct link to the sport, there has been that sort of detachment over the years. I think what Liberty have done and what Netflix have delivered is to bring that diversity, to bring a new audience that didn't know that they liked motorsport because they couldn't see it, is that you can't be what you can't see, right? In terms of a fan, in terms of an athlete, in terms of whatever it may be. So I think from my perspective, it's awesome to have so many new fans, and it brings a new form of conversation, a new lens, new ways of thinking. So I'm all for that. And I think the success has certainly been evident in terms of more races in the US market. The sponsorship and marketing off the back of the Netflix success has been huge, and the sport's growing off the back of it in all areas. So yeah, it's been a wonderful success. And now there's lots of debate as to where it goes now. Does it have a little bit of a fiction side to it, or does it really go deep into the reality and pick out the stories and the sort of nebulous, the inner workings of Formula One, whether or not that's engineers, mechanics, drivers, what makes those human beings tick, and how intense are those environments? Because Formula One is a very, very diverse environment in terms of you've got the business side, you've got the marketing, PR and communications, you've got the performance side, human performance, the research and development around the car, the engineering, that side of things. You've got the sport side with the drivers. So there's so much that goes on, and it sort of all comes together as a big circus. I always say it's a traveling circus, and everyone plays their part in the same sense that you go and watch the circus, and there's different disciplines and specialisms, and everyone has their moment in the limelight, and away they go. So yeah, it's wonderful to have more fans, and the more we can open up the sport, the better.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I really appreciate what Netflix does. They don't try to get into the nitty gritty of the races. It's more about the interplay of the personalities and the stories and the team owners. And you really get a sense of that drama and the human story behind the racing. But this is where I am so complimentary of you guys and the work you do at F1. I would encourage the listener, go buy F1 Pro TV. It is well worth the $80 that you guys ask. And you do such a great job of talking to somebody like me who doesn't have a background in this stuff, yet you are able to break some of this stuff down and explain things as you go. It's not like it's not like in American football, where if you don't have a great background in American football, if you listen to some of these commentators, you have no idea what's going on, what play packages they're calling. My wife asked me a question about a game recently that I had on, and I wasn't able to answer the question, but you guys focus on educating people and explaining these are the rules. This is why they practice on soft tires and hard tires. This is why they're simulating these different things. We learn all of that from you and the wonderful F1 app, which they do such a great job.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think definitely that it's a big team, and everybody at Biggin Hill and traveling to the circuits and so forth, they have a real passion for the sport. They want to tell the stories, not just the human side, but essentially break down the sport and make it more not accessible, but make it more understandable. And certainly we try and do that. It helps because we have the practice sessions as well, and the qualifying and the different formats. And we can really, if there's breaks or yellow flags or red flags or delays, we can get into some of the formalities. But it's nice to hear that it's well received your end and that it is going well. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. It is like really ruining me for watching football. To watch a 4-hour game and like 3 hours of that are commercials is so insufferable now after watching a race and continuous coverage and even the pre-show and post-show. It's only like 2.5 hours and it's so concise. There's always something going on. And again, you guys do such a great job of highlighting not just who's in the lead, but what's happening in the middle of the pack in the race field. You mentioned F1 being a traveling circus, which it absolutely seems like it. So for somebody who's not familiar with Formula One, can you explain what a typical race weekend entails?
Yeah, definitely. So you have, the big teams employ about 1,000 people, and sort of 350 will travel. You will, depending on your role, get to the circuit on the Wednesday and start to unpack. So the cars, if you're coming from a double header, will be stripped and rebuilt. The engineers will be working through all of their simulation stuff and the sort of data. There's huge data packs that the engineers have. I mean, these are huge dossiers of information, and that's passed on to the drivers as well. And there's so much that goes into the performance side of the cars that the data capture is just astronomical. So they will be working heavily through that. And then from a driver's perspective, it's about trying to get they've changed the press conference around. So you can get there on the Thursday now, and you're just trying to keep as calm as possible and as away from all of the duties that you have. The drivers have a huge number of duties. It's a bit like the week. Each Grand Prix is a bit like the week prior to the Super Bowl, right? That's literally it from a PR perspective. You're at sponsor events, you're at the circuit, you're flown in helicopters to dinners, you're here, you're there, you're speaking to the press, you've got set agendas, and it's all written out, your schedule for the weekend. And then you've got to perform as well. You've got to stay hydrated, the nutrition side of things, your travel with your trainer, and they'll do a really good job of trying to keep you up to speed. And then you've got the TV side of things, so that they will be setting up and putting all the cameras into position as early as a week before the event. And, you've got another 300, 400 people traveling doing that as well. So there's just so much that goes on to try and get a Grand Prix weekend together. And don't forget, some of these events are back to back as well, especially in Europe. So they'll be packing up on a Sunday night, traveling through to another part of Europe and trying to get there by sort of Tuesday, Wednesday, and then they go again. And for the mechanics and the engineers and a lot of people in the sort of heartbeat of the team, they might be away for anything up to sort of 30 days, and they're working every single day as well. They don't have days off, and it's long days, 14-hour days. And they brought the curfew in now over the Grand Prix weekend, but you can break that curfew, especially if there's damage or there's something that's gone wrong with the car or power unit changes, that kind of thing, or you're late into the circuits on a Wednesday with your setup and you're behind the schedule. So, they'll be working well into the early hours of the morning, and then they'll be back again at the crack of dawn to do it all again. So there's a lot of people working really, really hard to make it all work and function like it does.
I would love to see how much caffeine, how much coffee is consumed on a race weekend by everybody. That sounds like absolutely insane. Before we talk about the drivers themselves, can you tell us a little bit about these machines? How complex is an F1 car?
Yeah, so I think the F1 cars in the sense the way it's a power unit era now. So it's all been about that technology. You've got the MGK units, the deployment, the battery packs. You've got the internal combustion engine elements as well as the power. So the power unit's the overall umbrella. So really, really complex cars that create a huge amount of brake horsepower out of a very small engine, 1.6 litre internal combustion engine. They're producing sort of 1,000 brake horsepower. So very, very impressive with how they sort of get that delivered. And the tech is trying to be as road relevant as possible, but we are entering an era now where electric technology is building, and so Formula One's looking hard to make itself as carbon neutral as possible, carbon neutral fuel, that kind of stuff. So it's going to be interesting where we go. I mean, they've obviously published the new engine regs for 2026, but yeah, it's going to be an interesting direction in terms of how we go. I mean, that's the sort of power unit element. In terms of how the downforce is created, we've just had a rule change, so they've gone back to ground effects. So that's created challenges in itself, but it's got rid of all of the what I call litter that you saw in and around the front of the car, all the tuning vanes, all the different aerodynamic aids that were very much like shark teeth absolutely everywhere. We've sort of got rid of that now and gone back to, yes, you create a huge amount of load from the front and the rear wing and the air going over the top of the car, but actually it all comes from the diffuser and the floor and the ground effects. And so that's been a rule change that's slightly spiced up the running order, although we got Red Bull back at the front again. But, Ferrari looked really good at the beginning of the year. They certainly have a very good car over a lap. But the way the cars create downforce now, that's through ground effects that we haven't seen in Formula One for, a good couple of decades.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And it definitely goes to show when they're making those corners, that's why it looks so unnatural when the cars are cornering, because there's so much of that downforce forcing them into the ground. Yeah, that's so crazy.
There's huge amounts. I mean, it's, they produce huge amounts of downforce. I mean, it's frightening. And when you're in those corners, the G-force on the driver, I mean, you're 5.5 Gs under braking, you're 3.5 Gs through the corner. So that in itself, that's 5 tons of downforce on the car. Wow. So, that they could at 100 miles an hour drive, 150 mile an hour drive upside down. If you could actually get the car onto the roof, that's how much downforce they produce. It would stick to the roof.
Wow, that's incredible. Wow. So one of your coworkers, Sam, is one of my favorites to include because he explains all the tech. You guys have great interactions. I really love. What's that?
I was going to say, when you asked me the tech question, you needed him to answer that.
Well, and he does such a great job, not only during the show explaining what's going on, but also the features like Tech Tuesday, where it explains like the tire sensors or the aerodynamics and all of these things. It makes it so awesome to kind of follow along. And he'll talk about these upgrade packages that they'll bring to the cars in a certain week. So as the weeks are going, you're trying to improve your car. You're learning all the time about how it's performing in different conditions. And you start learning about, wow, this team is bringing this crazy upgrade package. And you're like, well, what's this upgrade package? And it's like a little carbon flange here and like a little change in the mirror curvature there. Like that's a major upgrade package, like minute little details.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's step by step. I mean, obviously you develop a car and they have incredible software for simulation, and then you've got the wind tunnel. There's no substitute for the wind tunnel because what the numbers say in the simulation doesn't always correlate to what you see in the wind tunnel. And then what you see in the wind tunnel doesn't necessarily correlate to what you see on the racetrack as well, because you've got to marry aero grip up with mechanical grip, because obviously we talked about the aero downforce. You've got the mechanical grip as well, which are the torsion bars, the dampers, that kind of stuff, working on contact patches with the tires and so forth. I mean, it's really, really complex. That's why they have so much data in terms of the engineers trying to marry their ideology and what the data says to the real. But yeah, Sam does a wonderful job in explaining it. And then you've got, hundreds of people at the factories just working on hundredths of a second. If they can find a tenth, that's such a huge breakthrough. And we've got the cost cap now, but they'll spend millions and millions of pounds trying to develop a tenth of a second, because, a tenth or two, that can be the difference between going out in Q3 or getting through to Q1. And that's, very, very, that's the difference between World Championship points or not. No points.
Yeah, that's right. So for the listener, with the qualifying, you're basically trying to get your best time, and there's 3 different ranges where they're eliminating drivers in the first 2, and then the last 10 get set by your position, and that comes down to hundreds, thousands of seconds. It is very, very close. And you described what the start is like. All the cars are at a standstill. They go as full gas as they possibly can into that first corner, but that's where all the traffic is. That's where you're going to have cars like side by side, and that's where all the chaos is. And so if you're one place back, because you're a tenth slower in the qualifying, and now that puts you into more danger, or that slows you up because you get that effect through the corners, that's a huge difference. That's a difference between, the top 10 drivers that score points or even making it onto the podium or not. It makes a big difference.
Definitely. And you don't want to qualify out of position because you're not used to racing in and around that area of the grid. You're not used to racing certain individuals that you'll be around. And it's where the melee is. It's where all of the concertina effect and the cars meet, vying for 1 or 2 lines or small areas of tarmac. And, the laws of physics and the, and so forth means that not everyone can get through. So that the likelihood of contact is very real. And then you've done all of that work. The team have put all of that work in, and you might have traveled 500 meters and you're out on the spot, which is really difficult to take as a team boss, because they've got to pay for it as an engineer, as a mechanic. You might have pulled an all-nighter. And then as the driver, you've got your own personal disappointment and the weight of the world on your shoulders, because you've got to trudge back to the garage and explain to everyone what went wrong.
Yeah, we saw that literally at, I believe it was Spa, and you saw that shot of Lewis Hamilton walking down some back alley to get back to the garage to explain what happened. So this is a good segue. Let's talk about the drivers, and let's talk about the physical demands. What kind of physical demands? You mentioned G-forces. What kind of shape do these guys have to be in?
Yeah, so racing drivers are predominantly quite small, although the TV makes them look quite large. You want to be under 70 kilos. So anything sort of from like 62 kilos up, which means that you've got to be really efficient with your strength, because you want to have a huge amount of sort of strength / enduro in certain muscle groups. But then you don't want to have muscle where you don't need it, because that's going to be excess weight, right? So drivers will tend to have big backs, no chest, like big triceps, no biceps, huge forearms, huge necks. And the sort of the G's, I mean, every time you hit the brake pedal, it's 1.5 bar. So you're looking at anything up to sort of 60 kilos, 65 kilos to 100 kilos of brake pedal pressure. So we had rugby players, which is your equivalent to football. We had rugby players come into the simulator, and when they first hit the brake, because the brake pedal doesn't travel very far, it feels as though it's not traveling at all. It's that solid. And when you hit it, they weren't braking, because they were hitting it hard, but they weren't hitting it hard enough. And I'd say to them, no, you don't understand. Think your beautiful pet dog or whatever it is has just walked out in front of the car, and you're going to nail that brake pedal with all your might. You're going to do everything you can. You're going to put everything into hitting that brake pedal, and then they'll do it. It's like bang, they'll do it. And then you're like, right, now you need to simulate that every single time you brake, and we're going to do it for like 75 laps in extreme heat. And so every time you brake, it's 65 to 100 kilos through your left leg. Then Formula One has power steering. But if we look at IndyCar, you're looking at about 30 kilos through the wheel. And also, if you're looking at 3.5 G through the corners in Formula One, anything up to sort of 25 kilos and above on your neck. So if you're going around a right-hand corner, you're going to have all of the force on your shoulders and then 25 kilos pushing your head. And then you've got to come out of that and then hit the brake pedal for like 100 kilos. And then you've got to try and right yourself, brace yourself in the car, use all your obliques, your glutes get so sore because you're trying to hold your legs up in the car, your hip flexors. I mean, Nick de Vries, who did his debut race for Williams, after the race, he just said, "I'm done. Like I won't repeat the expletive," but he just said, "My shoulders." He just came on the radio saying, "I'm done."
I was going to bring that up, actually. This is a pro driver. This guy drives, has a history of driving Formula 2. Very last minute, he gets called into this car. He's got a race for Albon, who had appendicitis. So he's got to do practice, he's got to qualify, then he's got to do the race, which is way longer than what he's used to. And the radio commentary was like, "My shoulders are dead. Like, I have no shoulders." Didn't they have to Didn't they have to get him out of the car?
Yeah, and they'll get him out of the car and he'll be in a bad way. When they go to Singapore next time up, the heat there is phenomenal. So you'll see drivers on drips after the race, pre-race, that kind of thing. There was a Formula 2 driver a couple of years ago that did his debut F2 race there, and he just literally came on the radio after the race and said, "Call me an ambulance," because he was just finished. And you just really struggle to explain how physical it is, especially in the heat. So if you're thinking 32 degrees, 34 degrees air temperature in the car, that's going to be pushing 40 degrees because of all the heat and the engine soak and the heat soak and everything like that around you. Then you are sitting in Nomex trousers, Nomex polar neck, and then you've got a triple layer Nomex suit over the top of you, which is like wearing a tracksuit to go skiing in or something like that. Then you've got your gloves, your balaclava, your helmet. And although you've got your head out of the car, that's an aerodynamicist nightmare. So none of the airflow is ever directed into that hole because it would just go in and then come out. And you want the airflow going as cleanly over the car as possible. So you'll see the drivers in Singapore putting their visor up and trying to sit out of the car in the pit lane as they trundle down the pit lane just to try and get some airflow. So you're imagine over 40 degrees with all of that kit on, no drink, no nothing for 2 hours in extreme, your average heart rate is going to be 150. So you're working average heart rate 150 and over 40 degrees with no drink, with all that core body temperature, because they've got the thermometers, you're pushing 40 degrees. Now, if you had a temperature of 40 degrees, you go to hospital. So they're right on the cusp of what's humanly possible. And it's so hard. I know some of you will say that I've seen them have a drink. Well, it's not really a drink because it turns into a cup of tea after about 10 minutes because it's so hot everywhere. So all you use that for, because it's boiling hot after about 20 minutes, is to just wet your mouth. Otherwise, your tongue just sticks to the roof of your mouth. So, yeah, it's really physical. It's horrible. And you'll get drivers, they won't say this on the media or pre-race because they don't admit weakness to anyone else. But, over the years, traveling to Singapore and stuff like that, after the practice sessions, drivers will speak to friends or trusted people in their circle and think, I don't think I can do this. I think I've got this in the locker. And it's that physical.
Wow.
It's really hard.
That's crazy. Okay, so you mentioned the people's necks, and you definitely got a sense of that, especially in the Netflix series when you see the drivers out of the car a lot. All of them have slightly different body types, but their face and neck is the same width. Like, to just hold your head up in those kind of G-forces would require that for sure. And then we'll link to this in the show notes, but there's a great video on YouTube. I think it's 14 or 15 minutes long, and it's called Regular Guy Drives a Formula One Car. And this guy gets the opportunity to drive, I think it was in France, it was a 2012 car that he got to drive, and they kind of train you all day, and then you practice for like 3 laps. And so as he's preparing, fit dude, he drove a little bit in kart same as you. And, fit dude, they put him in and they say like, okay, apply the brakes. So he pushes on the brakes and they're like, no, like apply the brakes. So he pushes down and they say, no, like you don't understand. Like you need to apply the brakes. And he does. And they go back and say, okay, well, that was about 60%. And he goes out and takes this lap and he sees his braking zone. And so he hits the brakes. His head snaps forward. He can barely like lift his head to see the corner, which he was able to get around. But they told him afterwards he was applying about 40% of the braking power.
Yeah, definitely. If you could superimpose Max Verstappen's talent into you, for example, and put you in the car, you just wouldn't be able to do a lap. You just wouldn't be able. A fit person, you just don't have the strength. I mean, I can't begin to tell you, when you hit the brakes for the first time, it's 5 times the weight, and you got the helmet on and everything, and it'll bang your chin on your chest. That's it. You're done. And when your neck starts to go, you're trying to hold your head up with your eyeballs. It sounds ridiculous, but you're like, oh, like straining away, trying to hold your head up with the eyeballs. It's got a bit better with the hands device now, because you can tighten the hands device. You're not meant to, but it gives you a way out. Whereas when we didn't have the hands device, when your neck went, that was it. Because literally you get into the corner and your head will fall over. And there's nothing you can do. Once that muscle, I think it's sternum or something like that, once that goes, you're done. And that would be day done. And, whether or not you're a young driver doing F3 or moving up to 3,000 as it was then, or World Series or GP2, you'd regularly go and do a 2-day test and you'd do the first day, done. You try and do the morning of the second day and you potter around, do a bit, and then that's it. You just call it a day, because you just can't do the 2 days.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the physical side. I would love to talk about the mental side. What is the driver doing during the race? What things are they considering besides just, throttle, brake, and steer? Yeah,
so the driver's mind is very active, because you have a huge amount of information that you need to digest. And that's not just what's rushing past your sensories, so your eyes or whatever it is, or what you're feeling through your backside or whatever. It's all of the information around fuel mileage. If it's IndyCar, you've got to work your tools, so you'll be changing the roll bar, brake bias, weight jacker, that kind of stuff. In Formula One, they're regularly changing the brake bias and working through the different engine modes, and the engineers are always in their ears. So the amount of information that you've got to digest and make really quick decisions and operate on is vast. And for the vast majority of human beings, just being able to operate at that level is, quite intense. So we get people on the simulators, for example, and then we'll do times tables, 8 times 8, 6 times 8, just because actually you've got no answer, because you just totally focus on what it is that you're doing. You just can't. It's so difficult to free up any other space to get those answers in and out, or get the questions in and answers out. So, it takes a huge amount of practice and being in the environment and working through all of the different warm-ups and exercises that the physios have. And then you've got the sporting side of things. So making sure that you are mentally fit, your mental fitness, so confidence, that kind of thing. Or are you fearing failure? What is it that or where's your mindset heading into that weekend? So the mind for me is the most complex element, and I always say the human underpins the performer. So we don't work enough with the human being. When it comes to coaching, we're brilliant on the technical and tactical side of things, but we don't invest enough time in the human element, because actually we can't always be the best that we want to be. And you could have the best technical and tactical skill sets, you could have the toolbox to deliver those technical and tactical skill sets, but actually there's so much more around the occasion that goes into that. And unless you've got the toolkit to be able to be the best that you want to be on that day and deal with the emotion and, you know, the focusing on the process instead of the outcome and getting rid of the fear and the failure and sensing the opportunity, then it's going to be, you know, a really difficult time for you. And we talk a lot about this, but it's not, you can't just go and be that. You can't just say that, you know. It makes great sense when you sit down with whoever it might be, your psychologist or your trusted set of ears or whatever, and you run through what we're talking about now. But then when you get to the circuit on a Thursday or Friday, all of the feelings that you had last time come flashing back. So you've got to have a process. I always say you've got to have a process to be able to get into the right mindset and make sure that you've got that sort of toolkit for the human element, that then you can go on and deal with the performer, the sort of performing elements. Because if you get that the wrong way around, it just doesn't come together.
Yeah. So a good example of that, I think of somebody like Nicholas Latifi. He's classically finished pretty much last in every race that he's done. He, you know, his teammate gets sick. So this rookie gets in the other car and is driving, and you're underperforming, whether it's your fault or your car's fault. You've got somebody who is hungry for a contract. There are 20 drivers in Formula One. So those seats are they don't come around all the time. Like, you don't get a lot of opportunities, and you wonder how that is affecting somebody in the back of their mind during a driving weekend when you've got all of these other things to manage.
Yeah, exactly. Latifi's an example. Daniel Ricciardo is a really good example of somebody that has all the talent in the world, but is still struggling to find how he unlocks that under the extreme pressure that he's under now. And, you know, he bounces back and he's the honey badger and he's always smiling and that kind of stuff. But even then, he's still searching for it. That just turn up, right, put a brave face on, make sure you're smiling, it'll come good, is still not working for him. You know, he needs somehow to sort of go back, Control Alt Delete and keep searching for whatever it is that's going to make his human side tick, because we've seen him perform and we've seen it throughout his career. He's got all the talent in the world. It's just unlocking it again. Yeah,
no, that's a good point. I also see it in the teams. I mean, right now, we kind of have a 1-2, arguably like a 1-2-3 with Red Bull as the top team. Ferrari and Mercedes is kind of on the come up. And these teams are, you know, all performing. They're typically, the top 6 drivers are coming from these teams pretty much every week. And you see the difference between Red Bull, who is just crushing it right now, and Max Verstappen, he doesn't make mistakes. Whether he's the fastest driver or not, he just never makes any mistakes. And you see it in the contrast with Ferrari. They're making all kinds of mistakes, and they're coming on the radio to tell the drivers, like, confirm plan G. Red Bull is not considering plan G. They are running plan A. They're doing their race, and everybody else is getting very reactive to them versus saying what you're going to do and not making mistakes with it.
Definitely. And if you look at their strategy at Ferrari, for example, that you can sense they fear failure. Now, they're not going to openly admit that. And that's a subconscious feeling as well. It's not a conscious. It's not the first in a high performance environment. You don't start fearing failure. It's a subconscious feeling. But what I mean by that is that there's elements of doubt. So they're always asking questions, you know, right, Charles, what do you think? It's all very reactive, as opposed to that sense of reassurance that they don't seem to be on the front foot. They don't seem to be proactive in terms of the confidence side of things. And, you know, I think that has come from a string of mistakes. So if you look at soccer, for example, you take a penalty, you miss that penalty, subconsciously that never disappears. So when you step up to take the next penalty, you've still got that in your mind. And actually, you don't have that clear mind where you're focused on the process. Suddenly the outcome comes into fruition. So you start to think, don't miss. You know, as soon as you start thinking that, you can't deliver on the process, because you're not engaged with the process. You're just outcome driven. And I think you're seeing that with Ferrari now. They just head into these big decisions and these critical moments, just hoping that they get it right and that it's not going to go horribly wrong for them. And that's sort of detracting from that clear execution, that total focus on process. And when you look at Red Bull and Max, he's just totally focused on the process. It's just mechanically and systematically delivered. And there's no doubt, it's just process driven the whole time.
Yeah. And so many people, even in, not only just driving, obviously, but with your personal goals, your business goals, whatever they may be, way too many of us are focusing on outcome-based goals. Yeah. I want to lose 10 pounds. I want to lift this much weight. Like that's fine to have that goal, but you have to realize that is not inside of your control. What is in your control is the things that you put in your mouth or the exercises that you do. It's going to the gym Tuesday morning at 5:30 in the morning when you don't want to. Like, that's what you need to focus on. I love that you take that approach. Yeah.
How because you say to people, okay, what's your goal? They'll say, I want to do it. And then you say, well, how are you going to do that? And then they'll like start loosely sort of flittering around the process and stuff like that. And then you're like, no. Like, unless you're clear on the process and you're totally focused on the process, I will say, nail the process and the outcome takes care of itself.
So thank you so very much for listening to this bonus episode of re-released content what we used in episode 341 with my interview with Tom Gaymor. Again, that episode is called Mindset and Performance with Formula One commentator Tom Gaymor. So again, I hope you enjoyed that. If you are a Formula One fan as well, shoot me a message and tell me who your favorite driver is and how the race went for you this weekend if you watched it. We love just connecting with everybody in any way that we can, whether that's health and fitness and talking about low carbohydrate diets, carnivore diets, whatever, or just talking about awesome sports stuff. We just love to meet people out there. Feel free to send us an email. That email is train, TRAIN, at myboundlessbody.com. As always, you can go to our website, which is www.myboundlessbody.com. You can book a free session with us. We'd love to meet you and help you with whatever plan. And if you're enjoying our show, as always, please leave us a rating and review on Apple. It really helps to get this message out to more people. And thank you again so very much for listening to Boundless Body Radio.